and our future. And we will hear the details of this, of course, as we go. Quickly introducing the Wilmette Institute. It will be 26 years old in January. It was established in 1995. After running a face-to-face program for a while, we decided to gradually switch to online, and we've been doing online courses since 1998. To date, and I think actually I probably could update these numbers yet again, but 625 courses, about 16,000 registrations in all those online courses from something like 127 countries. And our students have used course materials in all kinds of ways, giving talks to all kinds of groups. They've spoken on the radio. They've used the material for artwork. They have created tapestries. They have created, believe it or not, skylights, all as a result of taking our courses. And we're now working our way towards the possibility of accreditation and likely affiliation with Graduate Theological Union of Berkeley, California. This is a very exciting development. As I introduce Gary, I should probably say one more thing, though, about our program today. This particular webinar is an activity of the Wilmette Institute for its Climate Change Week, Global Climate Change Week. Global Climate Change Week aims to encourage academic communities in all disciplines and countries to engage with each other and with their communities on climate change action. The Wilmette Institute has participated in this particular Global Climate Change Week every year since 2016, and we have a special forum on our Moodle homepage for discussion of climate change and sustainability. I will provide more information about this year's forum discussion about racism and climate change, which is the theme of the forum this year, at the end of the webinar. And this year, the Wilmette Institute is happy to be adding a second activity to our Global Climate Change Week celebrations, and that is this particular webinar. Gary Reusche is talking about climate change, about survival, one world, and our future. So now to introduce Gary, here he is with his hand up, speaking. He's a very good speaker, and he has been doing this for quite some time. He was trained as a climate reality leader in the Climate Reality Project of former Vice President Al Gore, and he will today present climate change information to the participants with the hope of inspiring future local action. This, of course, is key with the climate change crises that keep developing worse and worse every year. The presentation is going to focus particularly on local impacts and solutions of the climate crisis, especially as they relate to the youth movement. Gary is a social and economic development worker living in Ukraine. He has combined a PhD in agricultural science with an MBA in management. He's managed projects in Central America, Africa, South Asia, and the ex-Soviet Union, both Russia and Ukraine. He's lived in Russia as well. His passion is to work for a sustainable future in a united world. As a social activist, he lives on a small farm and runs a residential vacation school for groups of children, youth, and adults, striving to build a culture based on universal moral principles. The following video was included in the Association for Baha'i Studies poster presentation, and you can, good eyesight, you'll see the vimeo.com link there at the bottom. We'll probably put that up on the page about this particular talk as soon as we can. So when this talk is over, it will be recorded, of course, and you'll be able to go to the link on the Wilmette Institute's homepage and find it, and you'll be able to find information about the talk, including that, and of course the recording as well. So without further ado, I will now turn the platform over to Gary. Welcome, Gary. Thank you today for participating in our webinar, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, I need to get the screen. I need to get the screen. Can you shut your screen down? There it is. Okay. And let me see if I can get my side of the screen up now. So share screen and PowerPoint, and this looks like that's where I'm supposed to be. So very good.
You can see it.
Fine.
Yep.
Okay, well, first of all, Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you, Wilmette Institute and Boyd and others who have supported and helped us to put this presentation on. I think that it's important that we have this discussion. I'm really happy that the Wilmette Institute is doing this work, as well as a lot of the other people around the world who are interested in climate change issues. Let me just say in the last couple of weeks, just as a kind of an introduction, I was involved in other webinars about climate change. There's an interfaith, devotional, and climate conversation that's held with a number of groups, including the Wilmette Institute. I think it's mostly down in the southeast part of the United States, in Florida, etc. And then there's a really kind of amazing group that's been doing webinars in the last couple of weeks, and a couple of more weeks they're going to be doing more webinars. It's called the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And there is a particular group called America's Zero Carbon Action Plan. Now, I thought this was fantastic because really I don't see so much information coming about climate change from the United States. And but the group that's putting on these webinars is really a very big group of academics and activists in the United States. And they're doing a lot of work to lay out a strategy for putting Americans back to work and, of course, mitigating the climate issues and working for the future. So I just wanted to make that point as we, before I really got started. And let me just say that this is a letter from, a quote from the Universal House of Justice from the Baha'i Faith. And it's from Rizwan, 2020. And it said, where leaders and prominent thinkers and commentators have begun to explore fundamental concepts and bold aspirations that in recent times have been largely absent from public discourse. Public discourse is a very important activity for Baha'i communities. And of course, climate change is becoming more of a public discourse activity, not as much as many people would like to see it, but of course, youth activists around the world and in the United States and in Europe, has made a lot of impact in the last year. Well, the pandemic has, of course, slowed them down a little bit. But if we look back at the last 30 or 40, 50 years even, which these discussions about climate change really didn't take front and center, but now they are in many places, and they need to grow more if we want to be able to, mitigate and look towards this future that we can believe in. So this is the Climate Reality Leadership Core that I'm part of, and this has slides from that program. A lot of research is done to put these slides together. They're quite good, they're quite informative, and they can be used there's about 3,000 or more climate reality leaders, that have been trained, that are working all around the world and giving these kinds of presentations to whoever wants to program them. And today, in the year of the Zoom, where everybody is on Zoom so much, we can, do training and utilizing these materials just about anywhere. I'm sitting here in Ukraine and we're talking to the United States. Well, I think there's some Ukrainians here, maybe some Europeans, but it's just so easy now to communicate globally. So really we have the opportunity to have discourse about these, interesting discourse and discussions even by Zoom. It's really a fantastic, let's say, benefit of having to live in our homes and in isolation during the pandemic. So going forward, let's just say that this is a beautiful slide of the Earth, of course. This was done during one of the space missions from in the 1970s. And of course, we look at the planet Earth, and when we think about this planet Earth, I think we more and more understand how interconnected the Earth is. Whether we're talking about the pandemic and the virus, the COVID-19, or globalization, or migrations, or climate change, so many things impact not just one country, they impact the whole planet. And so we can look at this planet these days and we can begin to visualize, that we really live in one world. And this, of course, was a fundamental, teaching of at the beginning of the Baha'i faith, that really we were moving towards a one world, but now it's not that we're not moving there anymore because we've already arrived in many ways. So when we talk about climate change, of course, we have these usual questions: must we change? Can we change? Will we change? Well, I think the answers, ought to be hopefully obvious to everybody who's participating, that yes, we must change, and we see reasons why we must change, and let's just take a look at a few of them. I don't know how many people have seen this particular slide. It's a beautiful picture. This is basically, again, a photograph from space, and we're looking at the atmospheric layer, that thin layer that kind of encloses our planet. And it's this particular thin layer that's impacting the world now in a very important way, because in fact the scientists will tell you, in the studies and the work that's been done for the last 50 years is showing us that the changes that we're seeing in the world today is because the CO2 concentration in this particular layer of the atmosphere are increasing. And so, most of the time, the radiation from the sun warms the earth. Some of it goes back into space, but now more and more of it is not going back into space. It's being trapped in that particular atmospheric layer, and is causing our climate to change and our temperatures to rise, both on land and on the sea. And so really the science for this is rather straightforward, and I don't think it takes a lot of, let's say, research and background to be able to understand a little bit that this is in fact one of the biggest issues that's taking place, because we see around the world, it doesn't take much thinking really or speculation. We know that around the world we're seeing a lot of factories and they're producing these greenhouse gases. We can see them around our neighborhoods. I can see them in the city in which I live. And really what we really have not thought enough about, I think, is how much of this is really going into the atmosphere, every day. Now these numbers come from science, but they look almost impossible to me to even think that 152 million tons of man-made global warming pollution goes into the atmosphere every 24 hours. It's really quite phenomenal. And really, we know, I think, from the facts that we're going to see more of during this presentation, we do know that this is impacting our world. But okay, so the question is, what are we going to do about it, right? When we talk about the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, and when we're talking about greenhouse gases, we're talking about mainly CO2, methane, maybe nitrous oxide, a little bit of ozone. These are the main greenhouse gases. And of course, they come from a lot of different, aspects of the civilization in which we live. Coal mining, industrial processes, industrial agriculture, crop burning, coal plants, oil production, air transport. These are the ones, but I just want to point at the top when they're thawing permafrost. No one really thought of that too much until recently, because what we're seeing now is just changes that are taking place, in the Arctic regions that are beyond really my comprehension. And I'll give you a slide about that in a couple of minutes. So going forward on this, let's say the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. And so, fossil fuels, we're talking about coal, we're talking about natural gas, we're talking about petroleum. And of course, these fossil fuels are really the remains from organic matter that was, put into the earth at maybe eons ago. And of course, they're being taken out and they're being used for fuel at this point in time. And if we look at this graph along the bottom, you see 1850 on the left-hand side and 2019 on the right-hand side. We see, up until about 1950, well, the burning of the fossil fuels and the use of the metric tons of carbon that's being released into the air wasn't so big. But starting at about 1950 and going onwards, it's almost become just very rapid. And so actually that's the right-hand side of the graph is more or less equal to my life, because I was born in 1951. And so, I can actually see the world as it was when I was born and when I was young, and see the world now. And I can actually feel and see the differences as I move around the world. And in what I've been doing in my work, I have been traveling around the world a lot. So going forward, so what's the result of, all of these greenhouse gases accumulating in that atmospheric layer? Well, let's talk about temperature. And here again, we look at 1880 on the left-hand side of this graph, and then it goes to 2020 on the right-hand side. And what do we see? After 1970, the increase in warming global surface temperature and its departures from the average temperature, has gone almost ballistic, right? It's exponential, and we're seeing that, you know, we're in the hottest years that's ever existed, and these numbers are still going to be going up. So the big question is, you know, how can we deal with this? I don't want to go into too much detail, but I've had some discussions with people who are climate change deniers, who would talk about, oh, you know, some of the algorithms and things that the scientists use are really not right. There's a lot of assumptions about them. I say, okay, let's forget all the algorithms. Let's forget all the models that the scientists have actually agreed upon, 99% of them, if not almost 100% of them. Let's forget about all those models. Look at what's happening to temperature. Isn't this enough to say that something really drastic is taking place today? Well, I think the answer is obvious. And so really, when we look at the latest of the years, you know, they have been the hottest years on record, and that pretty much is just a duplication of the slide that we just saw. And so these are continued to happen. These hotter and hotter year after year. And okay, here's from Miami, Florida. This year, you know, it's recorded the hottest week ever. And these temperatures are impacting everybody. And they're impacting many people worse than others. But okay, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the United States because it's just not enough time. In fact, I'm going to have to cut short some of these slides and move. You know, here I'm talking more about the issues of climate change and the degradations that are taking place. But I want to kind of balance off this presentation, so we talk about the issues and we also talk about the potential solutions for the future. And then we have to leave a little time at the end. So all I can say is there's not enough time to really go through all these slides. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about other countries. But let me just say that what we can show in slides about from the United States, and I'll be showing some more. We can show them. I can have dozens of slides from other countries around the world. And here's one from Australia, where we see extreme heat waves, severe heat waves. We've heard about the fires in Australia. You know, these impacts are not just in the United States, they are absolutely global. Okay, here's a slide. I decided to keep one in that's not in the United States. This is Siberia, Russia. I've lived in Russia. In fact, I even have a Russian passport in addition to my American passport. And I have a daughter that hopefully is watching the program with us today. And here is just something that's absolutely unbelievable. We're looking at Siberia, this red color that we're seeing. We're looking at Siberia that's pushing up against the polar ice caps. And we're seeing temperatures of 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius in these regions. That to me is just, can't even believe that that's even possible. But these kinds of temperatures are taking place in places that were always cold, always frozen. These are areas of permafrost. That means that the ground is frozen year round. But how can the ground be frozen year round when it's now at 38 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit? And we're seeing that this permafrost is now melting very rapidly. I'm not going to be showing slides of it, but I can show slides of it. And this is releasing great amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and, of course, accelerating issues relating to global warming. So these are the facts, and these really facts are quite not disputable facts by just about anybody in the world. You know, if you look at these facts and you understand them and see what the impact of these facts is around the world, then of course I think it becomes pretty understandable and pretty what's a good word to say here? Pretty something that has to be dealt with now, because you know we've reached the stage where we're beginning to see these problems increase and grow. Now, if we look at the Earth from a different perspective, a lot of the Earth is just water, right? And this water is something that, of course, also is being very heavily impacted by climate change. Maybe we don't notice it because we don't live out in the middle of the ocean, but in fact, 93% of the extra heat trapped by man-made global warming pollution goes into the ocean, right? So the oceans are getting warmer. Just like the air, the temperature of the Earth is getting warmer, so is the warming of the oceans. And what impact does this have on the world in which we live? Well, it has a lot of impact, as you're going to see. So again, looks a little bit like the same graph that we saw earlier, but this one is not about the air. This one is about ocean temperatures, and they are setting new records again in 2019, and there's likely to be new records in 2020 and 2021, et cetera, and et cetera. Well, these records of ocean temperatures is also a very existential threat to our planet, and we're beginning to see these threats grow in various regions around the world. So basically, I mean, this is just kind of the science behind it. As temperatures increase, the oceans tend to evaporate more moisture into the sky. Well, that seems pretty natural. I mean, the warmer it is, the more evaporation that takes place. This, of course, can be measured, and it is being measured by scientists. But essentially, you know, what we're talking about here is this evaporation takes place, and then the evaporation turns into, of course, rainfall on land. This rainfall on land turns into rivers. Rivers move back into the water, returns to the sea. Of course, this is a very simplified diagram of the hydrological cycle, but essentially, we just see that there is, you know, this constant moving around between evaporation and precipitation and water returning back to the sea. And this is what is going on now because the precipitation is increasing due to climate warming. But what is the impact of this increasing precipitation and this around the world? Okay, I would just want to pick one area outside of the United States quickly, just to say that we can show this picture in Bangladesh, we can show this picture in Southern Africa, we can show these pictures in different places around the world. This is from the Philippines. And we're seeing these storms and these typhoons and these hurricanes grow larger and larger and doing greater and greater damage to the peoples around the earth. And, you know, this is something that cannot be ignored. And it not only can it not be ignored, it's impacting a lot of people around the planet. And it's going to impact more if we don't begin to mitigate it. So let me just take a step back a little bit and say, well, you know, what do we think about some of these things? You know, how are they impacting people around the world? Well, there was a letter from His Holiness Pope Francis, you know, from the Catholic, group, and he said the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest. And this is, I mean, I think all of us must feel, you know, the sense that these impacts that are being created by, let's say, the activities that we have on the planet are not just impacting, you know, those countries that have the industrial capacities and that are utilizing these fossil fuels in maybe ways in which are too great because they're having a big impact on the environment, but the impact of the results of these fossil fuels and this increase in carbon dioxide is beginning to really impact a lot of people, and oftentimes it's the poorest people on the planet that are having these problems. So I'm going to just use a couple more pictures, you know, slides, you know, for these impacts of, and then I'm going to go and try to give a little bit of good news before I turn it over to questions. But of course, we're seeing because of this these increase in temperatures, we're beginning to see, of course, record-breaking precipitation. These are records that have been taking place. We see again the slide. You know, the slide shows that on the right-hand side, after 1990, these are beginning to increase more and more. And even this is something that is called, I think some of the scientists call this a weather bomb or something like that. It's just some of these effects of the increased, let's say, precipitation is actually causing really extreme sized storms that have never been experienced before. So, you know, when we look at some of these issues, we must feel a little fear and consternation, and you know, this is really something that can be frightening for many people, I think, around the world. But I just like to say that from the perspective of, let's say, my perspective as a Baha'i, and what I've learned from, you know, the founders of the Baha'i faith and people who have been discussing the issues around the world today, these are problems that face the world, but they can be entirely obliterated. You know, they don't have to be. They can be mitigated. They can be corrected. They can be uh, redesigned, if you will, so that we have a world that really becomes much more livable than the world that we currently live in. So I'm going to now, unfortunately, have to skip through a lot of slides. And by the way, there are so many other slides that we can go through about it, but I don't want to spend the whole time talking about how bad the world has become. Well, let me just talk about a little bit. I'll use one slide here just for the fun of it. This, of course, I put this just because I lived here. This is in Europe. And if we look at Europe and we look at things like groundwater levels in Europe, are in all over Europe, groundwater levels are reducing. You can see Ukraine, where I live here, on the right-hand side, and all the way into the edges of Russia. You know, these things are impacting, you know, a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. I could tell you a lot about what's going on in Poland, which is a neighbor, you know, to Ukraine, and the droughts that are taking place, and the water issues that are being important in places like the Crimea and the southern part of Ukraine. But okay, we just don't have enough time to do all of that. You want to hear some of that? Just give me a call, and I'll be happy to talk about them and spend more time in discussion. But I think I want to move down a little bit further and start talking about a little bit of something better. And so what do I want to talk about now for the next 20 or so minutes before we go into discussing, you know, questions and things? Do we want to change? Can we change? And I think the overwhelming answer to this has to be yes. I mean, I'm so happy, you know, at times when I see the young people around the world, you know, and my hero, my European hero from Sweden, of course, is Greta Thunberg, and you know, what she's done and what she's impacted around the world in terms of climate change is really phenomenal. It's slowed down a little bit because of the pandemic, but I don't think it's going to slow down. I think these young people are really going to put pressure, because those at the very top in society, whether we're talking about the business community, whether we're talking about the political leaders of these countries, are simply not giving enough attention to this. And the youth are running around and saying, you know, what are you doing? Look at what you're doing. Do you understand how this is going to impact our life in 10, 20, 30 years? And so, you know, in the Baha'i communities, this is from the Universal House of Justice, they wrote, may your minds be ever bent upon the needs of the communities to which you belong, the condition of the societies in which you live, and the welfare of the entire family of humanity, to whom you are all brothers and sisters. Really, I mean, I think, you know, Baha'is, we work for the development of our communities, of course, but I don't think we only work for the development of our communities. We work for our neighborhoods, our villages, our cities, and our countries, and of course the planet. And really, I don't see how we can, at this point in time in history, not understand the condition that's happening in the societies where we live. Because the situation, I mean, okay, I mean, how many things can we talk about in terms of the forest fires in Florida this year, the forest fires in Colorado, what's happening now down in the Gulf Coast with hurricanes over and over hitting the Gulf Coast? Well, it's just, there's too many things that are going on, but we have solutions at hand, and let's just talk a little bit of these solutions. Okay, we want to talk about green energy, you know. And so is it possible to reduce the use of fossil fuels? Well, here are some facts that not only show it's possible, but it's happening at a very fast rate. So in 2000, they said in 2000, the projection was that worldwide wind capacity will reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. Well, okay, that sounded pretty good in 2000, but the fact of the matter is that in 2019, we've actually done 22 times more than we predicted in 2000. And this number continues to go up. So we do have solutions, you know, in terms of wind capacity, but not just wind capacity. Okay, let's go to another. Well, here's wind capacity, and you can see from the year 2000, when this started to take off, up to 2019, where we're moving ahead on the capacity, the development of greater capacity in megawatts. This is something that we should be very happy about. And we need to work on, and we need to say, okay, these fossil fuels, they need to be left in the ground. I mean, that's what the young people are saying, and I just say the same things the young people are saying. They need to be left in the ground. Okay, maybe you can't do that tomorrow, but certainly we have to do it as fast as we possibly can. And so with wind industry, we can see that this is happening and things are going ahead well. What about solar energy progress? How do projections compare with the reality? Okay, let's go back to 2002. And what was the projection then? They said the solar energy market will grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. Okay, well, let's see what happened. Okay, what's the reality today? Well, actually, it grew 17 times faster than was predicted in 2002. So, what does that say? Well, that says that there, and even more. Oh, I forgot there was one more part of this. In 2019, then we even see it's been exceeded by 121 times. And so, my goodness, all of a sudden, the solar energy market has exploded and is taking off. Isn't this going to solve the problems? Yes, it will. Let's work on it. Let's make it a reality. So when we look at world solar installations, again, go back to 2000, 2005, and then it takes off. And here we're going through an exponential shift in 2019, 2020, and it's going forward from there. So this is very positive. This is very wonderful. And how did that take place? Well, here's one of the reasons why it took place is because, well, there were scientific advances in how solar cells are actually manufactured. They were very expensive in 1976. Now, when we look at 2020, look at the difference. In fact, I put some solar panels on my farm here in Ukraine. I've got 30 megawatts of production here for my home and for sales to the network here, to the grid. And I did it in 2019. Well, I'm actually going to be able to make a little bit of money on that, on selling some electricity that I'm producing here on my farm back to the grid in Ukraine. But if I had done this back in 1976, I probably would still be paying for the loan that I would have taken out, to put these solar panels out on my farm. So what we're seeing is the solar market is really moving. But here's the chilling market. First of all, we see that a couple of years went by and it started to grow, and then all of a sudden something fantastic took place. It just exploded. The Chilean solar market absolutely exploded. And so, this is very possible. It doesn't have to be just Chile. This could be Ukraine. This could be Germany. This could be the United States. It doesn't have, and the faster that we can make this happen, the more that we can get these greenhouse gases under control, and the more that we can mitigate some of the problems that are facing the Earth at this point in time. The fact is that there's enough solar energy that reaches the Earth every year to fill all the world's energy needs for a full year. In just one, I think it's in every day and every hour, it says, because I can't see it because my name is there, every hour. So really, if we could actually capture the solar energy from the sun, then we have all the energy the whole Earth needs and more. Isn't that good? And we have the capacity to do it. These inventions have come, and we have solutions to the problems. But unfortunately, we're not using those solutions well enough because we're still seeing, the greenhouse gases continue to increase even in times of the pandemic. This is all about global cumulative storage capacity. This is all about how to store energy into batteries and that sort of thing. A lot of work is going into the development of storage capacity. So energy storage deployments doubled from 2017 to 18, are projected to double again in 2019. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we can store this energy and that we're getting practically free of charge from the sun every day. So this is again a very strong indicator that we can solve some of these issues and bring things under control. But I think the question is, they need to be done at this point in time. Well, we all know that driving cars and trucks, is a serious problem for climate issues. And so, but if we look at auto manufacturers around the world, we're seeing that, well, guess all electric models are in production, and we're seeing more and more of these electric models on the roads and being produced. And so, even I've seen this. I don't have the slide with me now, but in Europe, after 2030, I'm pretty sure this is correct. After 2030, if in all of Western European countries, then I think you cannot sell a car that runs on gasoline or diesel. You know, so up until that point in time, they're still going to sell them, but after that, you may be able to still drive them. Hopefully, you don't want to drive them. You will get an electric car, but you won't be able to sell them after 2030. And I think I read something recently that in California, after 2035, they will stop selling these kinds of cars that utilize gasoline and diesel. Well, that would be a wonderful thing, of course, for the future of the planet, and we have to make that happen. But again, exponential growth, this can be done. These things are possible, and we just have to work at it to make it happen. So, can we change? Well, I think the answer is, obviously, we can change. And so, hopefully, some of these facts have shown us that it's possible. And now comes the next question, will we change? Well, I'm sitting here in Ukraine. I'm an expatriate, American. I was born in California. And I watch things in the United States. I watch the elections. I watch what people are saying. And yeah, the question is, will we change? I mean, they talk about the Green New Deal, and people are fighting about this. And some people, we're still seeing that large amounts of money from of subsidies are being given to fossil fuel producers. We know that in Europe, and we look back at the United States and we say, how is that possible? Why are these companies still getting all that money that could be used for something else? But anyway, will we change? I think change has to be, put on the agenda in the coming years. And hopefully, after the election, we're going to begin to see these massive changes, because the pandemic is impacting everything, but so is climate change. So is the racial issues that we know have been with us. I've been reading a book recently. I can't, because I can't think of the name right now, but she ran for the governorship of Georgia. I just read her. I'm reading her book, her biography right now, and the issues related to the African Americans in the United States are just incomprehensible, and really these things need to be dealt with, as we go forward. We know that there's a Paris Agreement. Of course, the United States wants to back out of it. We hope that this changes in the coming months, because really this is not just something, when we talk about climate change, we can't just talk about, the United States. We just can't talk about France or Germany or Ukraine. Climate change can only be mitigated on a global basis. And we're beginning to see a little bit of movement towards where we need to be, but we certainly have not reached the impact that we need to reach. And the only way I think that we're going to reach the impact that has to be reached in the coming years is through, I think, discourse, is through activity, is activism, is for working for change. Because really, in many cases, the politicians and the governments around the world are really, maybe they're constrained by what they can do, by their economies and everything else, and they need the encouragement of the young people as well as the old people, anybody else, to get out and make sure that these changes are going to be implemented in the coming years. Because otherwise, of course, we're going to see more and more problems. So. Again, we talk about, fossil fuels and everything else. Well, energy, when we talk about that, has been the worst performer in the U.S. Bull stock market began more than a decade ago. So really, they're not making money anymore. I don't really understand why do they keep bothering dealing with them. But okay, never mind that. But let's just say again some positive news: 24 states representing 55% of the American people have formed what's called the United States Climate Alliance. Like I said, I was involved in webinars recently about lots of activists and scientists that are really putting details on how we're going to change in the coming years. And this is really wonderful. So there's really lots of good news that can be discussed. And then even we have 240 global companies that have made a commitment to go 100% renewable. Well, to be quite honestly, I'm a bit skeptical of that. But anyway, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to do that, because I think when we talk about the world, we also know that economic growth, population growth, these things are all impacting everything in the world as well as climate change, and we need to do something about them if we want to go forward into the end of this century. again, I'm a big advocate and believer that we really need to, if these youth are out on the streets, we should be right behind them. We should be supporting them. We should be working with them, because really we're not getting the kind of response that we want to get from many of the political groups. Okay, there are people in the United States, I've seen it on the news, you know, these Green New Dealers and that, but you know, I'm not sure they're not criticized as much as they're being praised. So we really need, you know, voices and votes and choices and people to fight for the future, their community and their world, speak the truth to power, and work hard like your world depends on it, because it really does depend upon it. So really, I'm going to leave it at that. And of course, we can go back and talk about some other quotations from the writings, but let's just say that, you know, there's a lot of reasons. You know, I'd like to, as a Baha'i, I love to correlate Baha'i teachings with, you know, some of the existential issues that exist on the world today, and you can see that many of the Baha'i teachings are very relevant to the impacts and the activities that are going on today. So that's I know if I don't have too much time left. I think 18 minutes according to my watch. But I did work very hard to leave enough time for some questions towards the end of this, Rob.
Thanks. That was fantastic, Gary. And we can go longer than 18 minutes if people have questions. That's great. Some people are saying, could you please put that last slide up again? And others are saying, can we have all the slides? And you can't make the slides available because some of them are copyrighted.
They're all copyrighted, but I'm available, and another 30,000 climate reality leaders like myself are available, and we are encouraged to use these slides and use them and use them and use them. And so just let us know, and hell, we all live on Zoom these days. Just let us know and we'll do it. That's it, over.
That's right. That's right. The distance between the United States and the Ukraine is now a few nanoseconds. Absolutely. In terms of communications. So that's very true. They've had various questions that have been posed, and one person asked, if it's raining more, why is groundwater levels, why are they dropping?
Oh my God. Okay,
there's an obvious answer, but go ahead.
Okay, just like the increasing temperature, you know, causes the evaporation of the water to increase and get more water vapor, producing more rainfall. The increasing temperatures also kind of suck water out of the land. So and that causes more droughts. I think I showed you a picture from Poland, and I could have shown you some pictures also from Ukraine, that it was a drought this year, particularly in the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And really, so climate change will increase, you know, some rainfall in one aspect, and increase the desertification, or the reduction of water in the soil and in the earth. And so, well, they're all interconnected, and we have to be able to understand these interconnections if we want to make sense of them. But what I can say for sure, if we're talking about, you know, Ukraine, for example, is that we see them. We know these things are happening, that these things that used to be, we used to have more water, even on the farm in which I live. The well levels were higher 10 years ago than they are today. And I'm afraid they're going to go down. I don't want them to go down too much. I'm going to have to go down in there and dig some more. So yeah, I mean, there's more to it. I mean, there's a lot of science that can help to describe why it's happening that way. But in fact, it is very much related to climate change.
And certainly it's also related to human usage, because people are pulling so much water out of the ground that there are some areas where rainfall has always been low, and they've been basically, I think they call it fossil water that's been there for a few thousand years from perhaps the last ice age when there was higher rainfall, and now they're pulling all that out. Yemen is in particular danger, I understand, of running out of groundwater, and some of the other Middle Eastern countries as well. They're just pulling the water out of the ground so fast that it's going into the atmosphere ultimately, because it gets evaporated out of the crops.
Just a quick question on that. I'm doing a job right now in Iraq. I'm doing it virtually from Ukraine, but I have to do every day. I'm in Iraq virtually and studying this. But you know, the Iraqi system in terms of water, all of its water comes from Turkey, and it goes through Syria into Iraq. and it is being impacted every day. And it's just, I'm sitting there saying, well, how do we solve these problems in Iraq? They're almost very difficult to solve. So yes, I mean, these water problems are almost planetary. And you can go through many different reasons why they're taking place, but they are taking place. Okay, let's just one more thing. Why did so many immigrants, people run out of Syria back into Europe and cause all of these migrations into Europe? It was because of climate change. It was because of the droughts in Syria that went on and on and on. The people had to leave their farms. They had no place to go in the cities, and they ended up running to Europe and creating all kinds of problems in Europe. So, but this, these things are happening around the world over and over again, and the world just has to wake up and deal with them, because they are going to happen.
And of course, water rights are huge issues right now in Iraq. And that area, the Turks are building a big dam, and they're saying, "Oh, don't worry, we'll send water downstream to Iraq too." But the Iraqis aren't so sure right now.
Not so sure. Lots of problems with the salination of the soils in Iraq, and it's a very bad problem. I'm trying to help them to solve it, but Jesus, I don't know.
Yeah, several people want your contact information, and we can certainly, if people write, learn@wilmetteinstitute.org or some other Wilmette Institute address, or post it on the YouTube channel. Certainly, we can get the information to you.
I just put my email in the chat. You can contact me directly.
That's very helpful. One person says, "I'm involved in local city effort to form an environmental committee. What direction should I encourage them to follow, bearing in mind their influence covers about 50,000 people?"
Well, okay, I'd have to go into a lot more details about it, but let's put it this way. I think the first thing that comes into my mind, this is a community. This is a real community, and communities can work together. I mean, this is essentially, we as Baha'is, we are really very strongly believe in bottom-up community development activities, right? Well, what you're talking to me is a bottom-up community activity. That's how you're going to solve problems in the Baha'i faith. That's how you're going to solve problems outside of the Baha'i faith. I, of course, with the Wilmette Institute, I teach a course on consultation for businesses and for organizations. And we have talked about this. We've talked about Peoria, Illinois, and how we can use consultation in the Peoria community to try to overcome some of the racial issues that take place there. And so, I think the only way that we can really solve some of these issues in our communities is to try to formulate groups, to work together with them, to find some agreement, and go through the discourses that are going to be needed to understand these problems. I can give one more example about Peoria. There's something that called, you can actually map the city and by different districts around the cities, where the schools are, where the people are, where the problems are. And the more information that you can collect about different communities, the more you can actually begin to create solutions to solve some of these problems. But they certainly are not going to be solved if you ignore them and you don't deal with them.
One person mentions recycling rainwater with small water cycles, rainforclimate.com. It's kind of hard for me to read because it's split on my screen, causing the rainfall to sink back into the soil. And certainly I've noticed that this is something cities increasingly are doing. Runoff from the streets is now being directed sometimes to low areas near the street, so it'll sink into the ground and that sort of thing. So that's certainly important.
This has become really, really, let's say, very, very important for today. There's a lot of talk about, we call it regenerative agriculture. I'm, of course, my background is in agricultural science, and regenerative agriculture is not new to me, even though people say it's new. It's not new to me. It's about soils. It's about taking care of soils, and part of the thing about taking care of soils is, of course, making sure that they have, something growing on them, and so that it allows the water, of course, to be absorbed and not run off. And so I think, well, if we talk about Iraq, let me just go back in Iraq. I'm talking about developing programs for peri-urban areas in Iraq. those agriculture areas around the cities. And really, the main thing that we have to tell them to do is we have to work to develop modern systems whereby you can trap the water. It can be absorbed into the ground more. And when it comes to water for the crops and everything else, well, we have to find better ways. We just can't use a lot of water anymore in Iraq. So we're going to have to use other systems like drip irrigation, or we're going to have to grow crops using hydroponics. We're going to have to find some new ways to solve some of these problems in places like Iraq or other countries around the world, because really water is becoming a problem.
Eileen asks a related question to that. Can desalination of seawater help?
I don't know. Of course it can help. And of course, I don't know all the details everywhere, but of course, Israel is very well known for desalinating a lot of water for agriculture and for water usage in Israel. And so the question is, can it be done? Yes. Can it bring a lot of water in? Yes. Can it be done for California instead of stealing all the water from the Colorado River? I don't know. Maybe California can do it too, but it costs money to do it. And well, a lot of things cost money. And what we're finding out, used to be, for example, hydrogen. Now they're beginning to talk in Ukraine about producing hydrogen and engines that use hydrogen for cars and for trucks. I said 10 years ago that was impossible because hydrogen would have cost far too expensive for it to be economically feasible. But now, because you can produce hydrogen using solar panels, which is using free sunlight, this hydrogen can then be used to power cars without batteries, power trucks, etc., etc. And I think this is going to take off. We're not hearing much about it, but I do think this is going to take off. It's even being done here in Ukraine today, and it's starting to be done in other parts of the world. But again, okay, so if there's a way in which we can economically get that water, desalinate it, and use it, well, that would be wonderful. But I think that's the only question. Can it be done? Countries are doing it today.
Another person made a comment about rainfall as a result of climate change is beginning to fall in fewer storms in larger amounts. And so you tend to get flooding and more runoff, and there's less time for it to percolate into the ground. So that's another issue that has been happening.
Absolutely.
Let's see, water rights. People are mentioning the problem of water rights. Bottom Up is also a not-for-profit organization called www.carboncapturedayevent.com, where the team aspires to go on par with Earth Day. And someone else is talking about Massachusetts efforts there. Let's see what else we've got here.
Well, just a quick comment about that. I mean, my particular feeling is that sounds like a good organization. I don't know much about it, but it's bottom up. Sounds already a good way to start. And but certainly, we have to get involved. I mean, I think all of us, all of humanity, we need to get involved in these groups that are working for social change and for environmental change. I mean, okay, go to the UK today. What about these Extinction Rebellion people? What are they running up and down the street and crying for? Do they have a reason to do that? Well, scientifically, it sounds almost, why isn't everybody out on the street running up and down and causing problems, quite frankly? So, I mean, there's just these Extinction Rebellion people, they're being quite nasty in the middle of London, but they're being nasty because nobody else is doing anything, and they figure if they're not being a little bit nasty and being a little bit aggressive, then nothing's ever going to happen, and all the animals on the earth are going to disappear because everybody says that 60 or 70% of the animals, have extinction, and people are calling it the third global extinction. I can't remember, sixth global, I don't remember which number it was, but yeah, there's a huge extinction going on with animals around the planet. And insects, and even pollinating insects for agriculture. There's so much going on. What happens if tomorrow I can't grow any more wheat across the street from me here in Ukraine because nothing's pollinating the wheat anymore?
Yep. A couple of other questions here, very interesting ones. One person asks, Ellen asks about good governance. What would good governance look like in order to solve some of these problems.
Okay, let me just turn it over. Let me just say that there are three of my very close friends that I've known all my life. Arthur Dahl is one of them, but anyway, Augusto Lopez. Anyway, there's three Baha'is who have written a book about global governance, and it's a very good book. It's been published. They are speaking to the world about these activities, and yes, we need a better global governance. Let's talk about SDGs. You know, what are they called? Development goals. What's the S for? I forget.
Sustainable, probably.
Sustainable development goals. You know, we know that there's been sustainable development goals around the world. Do we know how little these goals are being fulfilled? You know, far too little. You know, so yeah, the world says we must do them, but the world is not doing them. What reason for that? I think it's governance, because governance is going to be very hard in the current situation. You know, it means that we're going to have some rather major transactional shifts that need to be made to solve some of these problems. I call it degrowth. I don't know if that's a terminology that I particularly think is correct. We have to start thinking about degrowth. Do we need all of these things that we have? You know, is it really needed? Don't we know this is destroying our civilization by having so many things that we really don't need at all? So, you know, that's when we're talking about governance, it's going to be, there's no question that a transactional, a change has to be made, and it has to be made relatively soon. And it's not a small change. When people come and say, let's make a little change here and a little change there, I start rolling my eyes. I said, no, little changes are not going to do it. Little changes are not going to do it. We need to think much bigger than that, because we're at that stage.
Yeah, the one person here mentions the climate interactive simulator that was released last year suggests that a global price on carbon is essential to keep warming down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But that, of course, will require maximum biological carbon sequestration and carbon capture to get us back down to 350 parts per million of CO2. We've just hit 401, 402, 403, something like that. It keeps going up. Maybe we're up to 410 now. I don't know. When I was a kid, it was 270 or 300. You know, it's amazing.
It's going up faster, and also than I think many of the models suggested. So all of the models are really kind of, you know, some of the climate deniers will say these models are wrong because of the assumption, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, they really are on the conservative side, many of these models. And we're beginning to see, like the permafrost in the Arctic areas. Well, I don't think those were in that kind of permafrost was never included in the models. I don't believe that. Okay, I'm not the model developer, but I know a little bit about models.
Yeah, I can remember when I was in high school watching on TV, this would have been 1968 or 69. They showed a chart of the increase of carbon dioxide, and it was going up and down seasonally like this and kept going higher and higher. This was TV in the late 60s. They were talking about carbon going up and the greenhouse effect. But of course, nobody in the late 60s or maybe 1970 had any idea how to quantify the impact. They were speculating, but they really weren't positive.
Yeah.
And it became very clear later on when I was at Brown University in graduate school in planetary geology, 75 to 77. The climate change people were on the 3rd floor of the building, and us studying the moon and Mars were on the 1st floor of the building. And they were afraid we would figure out about climate change on Mars before they could figure it out on the Earth. And I was listening to all of their techniques and all of the different ways they measured temperatures in the ocean in the past. It was fascinating work and very, very painstaking, very precise work, bit by bit, this data point onto that data point. And now, after 40 or 50 years, we've accumulated an enormous amount of data about climate change. It's just irrefutable.
And not only that, it has substantiated those things that were discussed in the 70s. Al Gore, who's famous for his work against climate change, the movie that he's done, you know, the movies plural that he's done, in Inconvenient Truth, and the sequel to the Inconvenient Truth or something like that. Al Gore was studying climate change when I was finishing high school, which was 1969, 1970. You know, so you know, it's been going on for a long time, but it wasn't until the forest fires in Florida and the floods on the eastern shore of North Carolina and all the problems down in the Gulf, in Australia, in all other places, that all of a sudden people say, well, maybe there's something to all of this climate change business. But hopefully we've well gone beyond that, and we're about to. Yes, that was right. Thank you very much, Gary Colliver. It is Arthur Dahl, Maya Golf, and Augusto Lopez Perez, and he put in the where you can go download the book, read it, because most of the problems in the world today are definitely going to need a one world solution. We cannot do this just by the United States. And then, you know, then the big question is, how do we get the United Nations? I work for the United Nations now in this job I'm doing in Iraq. How do we get the United Nations to do the things, you know, to get the countries involved? How do the peoples of the world change the United Nations, support the United Nations, you know, to get it beyond the current situation where it is now, where I think both, you know, Arthur and Maya and Augusto will all say that it needs fundamental change in the United Nations before it's going to be able to solve the problems that we have in the world today. But how is that change going to come about? Personally, I don't think it's going to go about until we get out and do something. We can't sit at home. We have to get out and do something before this change will happen.
And that's, I think, been in many ways shown that the nonprofit, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations have really been able to push a lot of these topics forward in ways that the diplomats have not. And this has been one of the, I think, really interesting developments in international work in the last couple of decades. One person asks this interesting, or makes this interesting comment. Derek says, speaking of hydrogen, I recall either in middle school or high school being told that if we could figure it out, we could use hydrogen, the hydrogen of a glass of water, to power the entire US for a day. Of course, that's a reference to hydrogen fusion, which no one has yet been able to figure out how to do profitably.
I'm not sure exactly how hydrogen works in an engine, to be honest with you, because it's new. I mean, we heard about it, but we never paid a lot of attention to it. But all of a sudden, I actually read this a couple of months ago here in Ukraine. I said, what? And then and then we got some training from the Al Gore group about it. And all of a sudden, hydrogen is on the list of things that seem to be ready to take off. Let's hope so.
Yeah, hydrogen in that sense is just a substitute for natural gas.
Yeah.
It just burns in the cylinders just like gas or gasoline would. Person here has made a comment about how China is doing amazing work with carbon sinks. A BBC article 3 days ago, China's aggressive policy of planting trees is likely playing a significant role in tempering its climate impacts. This, of course, is quite important because I think the Chinese are the largest releasers of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere today. So the more trees they plant, the better.
They are, and of course, China, I think, I mean, I'm not a China expert, but we do watch China, and of course, you know, there are many good things coming out of China, really. And so, but at the same time, we can watch the destruction of the environment that's taking place in China, and China has had to. I mean, after what was it called in the revolution in China?
Cultural Revolution.
After the Cultural Revolution, of course, China was in pretty pitiful shape, and the growth that's taken place since the Cultural Revolution is phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And then all of a sudden, we see China cities that are just impacted by pollution, by everything else. And I think the Chinese government woke up and said, that's not really going to work. And so you actually hear them, even in the last month or two, beginning to make significant changes in terms of looking at the climate and climate mitigation, whether it's planting trees or whether it's reducing fossil fuel use, increasing the use of solar panels and wind energy. They're going to do it in many ways. Well, I think the United States is still perhaps ahead, but I don't think it's going to be ahead for long. I think China is going to move ahead with that.
I think they have to, because they've got 4 times the population of the United States in an area of the United States, but only about half of that area is really easily habitable. The other half is mountains and deserts. And they're using coal primarily because they don't have petroleum. So it's the Chinese are going to have to do a lot with wind and wind and solar. I think that's quite clear. Someone has a URL here, a couple of URLs that have been posted in the chat. The localization of the Sustainable Development Goals or Global Goals.org can be seen at a certain place. ClimateRealityProject.org is the URL started by Al Gore. So they've got that URL in the chat as well, which is useful. Thank you, people, the people who've been posting those. Someone asks about the whole question of whether fusion is dangerous nuclear power, but I don't think we want to get into that here today. That's an interesting question, of course.
It is. Okay, but let me talk a little bit about getting back to the Climate Reality Project. I am part of that. I am registered on the Reality Hub, and for example, the talk that I give now is going to be I will put it into the statistics of the work, because we all are expected to do work in this club, and I know only of myself and one other Baha'i who is a member of this group. Now, I would like to see a couple of thousand other Baha'is in this group. Really, quite frankly, I think there should be. First of all, the latest training was done online. You don't have to go anywhere. It doesn't hardly cost any money, and you can get this training, and you can have all of this material, and you can start working on these issues with communities, local, regional, national, whatever. And it's a great group of people. And Al Gore is a wonderful guy. I mean, he's a friend of the faith, and he has worked on this. It's been his passion. And he's done a wonderful job. And the team that he's put together, these climate reality leaders around the world, that we are all committed, and we're all working towards these changes.
How many people are there involved? Do you know?
I think 30,000, but I might be wrong. I believe I heard that once, but I could be wrong. But they continue to grow.
That's fantastic. That's a very impressive operation then. But it's obviously extremely important in terms of the current situation with climate crisis that's developing more and becoming more and more serious. I'm going down here to see what else we have. Somebody comment about deleveraging in financial markets, indicating that an important shift is taking place. That may relate to the stock prices of oil companies and such too. I don't know. One person asked, "Do you see a future for nuclear energy?"
No, because again, nuclear energy. We have nuclear energy here in. Okay, let me tell you my story about nuclear energy. Has anybody ever heard of Chernobyl? It's right down the street from me here in Ukraine. Actually, it's a couple hundred kilometers away. But clouds from Chernobyl passed over where I'm living right now, affected my wife, who has had problems because of that. That was 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe nuclear energy is possible to create, but it's still dangerous, and I do think we're going to see problems with it. And if we get problems, it's going to be big problems. It's not little problems that impacted all thousands and thousands of people here in this region when there was a problem. And why was there a problem? It was just simple error. It's like nuclear bombs. You know, there's nuclear bombs all over the world. You know, what happens if there's an error? What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if somebody gets their hand on them? I think the same about nuclear power, but I'm no expert on that subject.
Well, it gets into the issue of governance again, too, because if governments don't manage them, license them, maintain standards, and make sure that the designs are as safe as possible, then millions of people can be affected. And that's obviously a huge problem. We're getting lots of comments now in the chat. Unfortunately, my chat is so small, I can't easily read them. So.
Jennifer says it's talking about nuclear fusion, which is what the new system President Macron is talking about. Okay, listen, I'm not going to fight that. I mean, basically, I don't know the answer to that. But we do know that the fuels that are coming out of these programs are problematic. And that's the only thing I can really say. Maybe it can be done safely. I mean, many countries, I think, are doing it safely, but I don't know. And the question is whether we need to do that anymore.
Right.
Can we?
There's still the issue of nuclear waste, too. Even if you can build the reactors that are safe, they're still,
Exactly.
they produce a mess. Though there is some very interesting research being done apparently on some small reactors that apparently are unable to melt down, but that's a different subject for a different day.
Hooray, Janet. I'm glad to see another member of the local climate reality group. Hooray.
Well, that's good. I'm trying to read these comments. They're very hard because I have a little narrow window. The name of the group Gary wants 2,000 Baha'is to be involved in again?
It's the climate reality group of Al Gore.
Can people just find it by Googling it?
Yes. There's a couple of people who put in already links to that already.
Yeah.
But anyway, or write me or whatever. And all you can do is get involved in the next training. You get these slides, you get trained, you get to meet a lot of people, and we're all working together, helping each other. There it is. Johan just put the climaterealityproject.org for people to see.
Good.
Meat production is indeed a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Absolutely, lauded. And so we should all be vegetarians. And I'm doing my best to be a vegetarian. I mean, really, one of the things that I've done, I've written, I've made some videos about some of these issues, like meat production. I don't think people really understand how much this is impacting the planet. And there are movies about this. I can't remember the names of them, but you can go out. There's plenty of movies. You want to see a movie about it? I think I got one on my computer that I downloaded some time ago. It is really impacting the planet, you know. And so, you know, not only that, it's considered to be not that good for our health too, isn't it? But anyway, that's a subject that we could go a deep dive into. There's plenty of data about it. I've collected some of that data. I've even published some stuff about it. There's no question that there's no need for that. Even though one of my best friends is from Montana, he grew up on a cattle farm, and I went out to visit him a couple of years ago, and we went out to his farm. He's now a professor at Montana State University, but he's a friend of mine out there. So I said, I want to see where you grew up, because he showed me some cowboy saddles. He helped me to buy some of the cowboy saddles and stuff like that. And I went out there and I see all these cattle on his farm in eastern Montana. And I said, well, what do you do with these cattle? They basically breed these cattle. New cattle are born. They eat a bit of grass, and then they send them off to these huge feedlots, you know, to stuff them full of food and antibiotics, and then sell it in the marketplace. That's supposed to be good. It's not good for the climate. It's not good for the cattle. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for the world, you know. But they're doing it, and people are still buying this cattle.
Yeah.
Even though I understand now, because of the climate, because of the problems now with the virus, that a lot of these meat slaughtering facilities have gotten a lot of virus in the workplace, and they're having trouble actually staying operational.
And the animals, when they're pumped full of antibiotics too, actually can breed bugs that are now antibiotic resistant. That's another thing that's happening. One person actually following up on that has asked about sustainable farming and how impact it can have on climate change. And since you are on a farm, you've probably done a lot of thinking about sustainable agriculture.
Don't get me started on this. Okay, this is a big topic, and if you really want to talk about it, it is a topic that, I do teach in Wilmette Institute course. You know, there's a course about agriculture, you know, the Baha'i aspects of agriculture, and we do a lot of talk about this sort of thing. There are 2 or 3 other agriculturalists that are teaching this course, and we've got actually other groups. So there are people working on this subject matter. But let me just say that that we are in a world that during my lifetime, the corporatization of agriculture has taken over really the agricultural system worldwide.
Yeah.
The Syngenta's, the BASFs, the Bayers of the world are now really turning in a lot of farmers around the world, in the United States, in Europe, elsewhere also, not just these countries, turning them practically into sharecroppers. The farmers are out there. They basically have to buy their inputs from these huge corporates, these huge multinational corporates, and they have to sell their products to these same multinational corporates who have a complete value chain, under their control. Now, how does that going to work? How do we get into sustainable farming from that particular perspective? Well, here's my take on it. I say, move out into the countryside, create a community, create a cooperative, create a group of people that work together and live in the wonderful countryside. Me and my wife say, out here in the countryside, I'm surrounded by farms and I'm surrounded by forests. We wake up and we joke and we say, God, it's really tough living here in heaven, really. So it's possible to move into the countryside and live in the. You don't need huge amounts of money. People will say, "Oh, you can't make enough money and live in the countryside." Well, okay, you can do something better. You can work in that direction, and I think be successful. And I think it's good for the future, because my expectations for the future is that the cities are going to see increasing problems.
And it's good for people to be in nature anyway. Also, that's another side to all of that. I think I have a little 5 acres near me that fortunately belongs to the city, and they're not developing it. And I every year watch the trees get a little taller and the different kinds of grass. And my cat wanders through it and finds the catnip, and other people pick wild foods there. And it's really quite fun to watch everything in that little 5 acres go through its seasonal cycle.
Let me respond to Warren for a second here. Please. Warren Chamberlain, agribusiness is bad business. We need to restore family farming. And Warren, do you know why agribusiness is bad business today? Do you know that the legal changes that have taken place in the last 40 years? I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. I worked for an American university. I worked at North Carolina State, and also, and I was part of the seed production program of that university. We had crop breeders, and we produced seeds, and we sold these seeds not for a huge profit, enough to keep the state farms operational and everything else. That has been taken over by the corporates, totally, right? And so it's no longer in the hands of, and the state universities are no longer being funded like they were when I was there. And so the students in the state universities have to pay much more tuition to be in the university, sometimes taking huge loans, but they spend the rest of their life paying for. But in my days, it wasn't like that. What was the change that took place? Changes in the laws, changes in the infrastructures, and these laws have created a huge problem. And that's why corporate farming, which is essentially a monopoly, really a business monopoly, is kind of open doors in the United States, in Europe, and other places around the world. But this is against what we used to believe in 50 years ago.
And in the agriculture course, Wilmette Institute agriculture course, they were talking about this problem in Canada as well.
Yeah.
A person asks about deforestation. Have you any comments about the issue of deforestation?
Well, the comments is don't do it. I mean, I don't know what other comments we can possibly give, other than the fact, that deforestation is a big problem. The flip side of that is people saying we must plant 1 million trees a year or a month or whatever, to be able to have some impact on the decarbonization of the planet and to minimize the effects on climate change, right? So the more trees we take out in the Amazon, the worse the climate problems are going to be. We know that. There's no question about it. The same thing in Ukraine. We have the same problem in Ukraine. They're taking too many trees out of Ukraine, and it's going to impact the climate. And who is stopping this? We as humans on the planet, we're not stopping it, because the corporate powers and the corruption that goes on around the world is allowing this, and we're not doing enough to stop it.
Yep, there's so many comments here, I can't even keep up with them.
The monetary banking system is at the heart of it. Thank you, Warren. I'd love to do a webinar on the banking system. Does anybody here know what quantitative easing is? I can't see you raise your hand, but if you don't know about it, it's basically the central bank you know, creating money out of thin air,
Yeah,
not just a
printing
little
money.
bit of money. Creating money out of thin air. Do you think someone's going to pay that money back? Well, the taxpayers in the United States are going to pay that money back. Does anybody talk about that? Hell no. Too bad. But it's a big problem. Central bank is the cult. Yes, go Eric Mass. Very good. Does anybody know how the central bank was created? Who created the central bank? We really need to study these things in the classes. People are not studying them. Who started? Okay, well, I'll give this one to you, Rob. Who started the central bank?
Alexander Hamilton in the United States.
It was actually 6 oligarchs. They went to a small island off of South Carolina, made a plan, and they figured that they could not, you know, get this plan through Congress if they gave it directly to Congress. So they kind of snuck the plan into Congress and passed the central bank. The central bank is essentially being managed and owned by the banking system in the United States. And so all this money is being created. Who does it belong to? And by the way, the central bank is doing what with the sometimes in my head I can't get all my words in my head at the same time. The in New York you have the
Reserve Bank.
Huh?
Oh, you're talking
Stock
about the
exchange?
investment banks, Wall Street.
No, the investments that are made into the stock market, right? Do you know that central banks around the world are investing in stock markets? For example, the Central Bank of Japan, I read, owns a great deal of all of the stock market in Japan. And the Central Bank of Switzerland owns quite a bit of Apple and Google, I read somewhere. Really?
Smart investments, you might say, in terms of making money.
Exactly. Rothschilds, JP Morgan, and Rockefellers, where the big folks are at. Thank you, Jennifer. So there's a lot of people out there that know a lot about these things. Okay, but what are we doing about them?
I'm looking to see what else we've got here, specifically about climate change and such.
Jan, I want to ask Jan Dietrich a question. I'd like to, if you can send that about, I heard that about North Dakota. I heard also they do a similar, she writes there, California recently passed a law allowing local governments to establish a public bank. And it based on a model, I think, that's been used in North Dakota, a good model, I think I read about it. There's also models in some places in Europe, like in Italy. I would love it if you could send, you know, some information about that to my email, and because I want to write a little bit about that, because when we talk about Baha'i community development, banking, I think I used to be a manager for a credit cooperatives here in Ukraine. So this is basically a cooperative bank type of a situation. And it's something that I really believe in, but it can be done, and it may be a good alternative to the unbelievable management of the banking system around the world today, which I have great fears that there's a huge bubble and it's going to come, it's going to come down on our heads. And when it comes down on our heads, not like in 2007 and 2008, it's going to come down much harder.
Yeah. One thing, and we probably should wrap it up pretty soon. I remember you and others have comments about cooperatives, and of course, co-ops are no longer as supported legally as they used to be. I wonder if you have any comments about the role of co-ops.
I say I'm going to give a webinar about co-ops in about a week. Well, actually, at the end of November for the Association of Baha'i Study Agricultural Group. Because, and I've also done a talk about that at the conference that was in Ottawa that we met at. But basically, let's put it this way. First of all, let's look at what is a co-op. It's just a business, right? But in the United States, you have businesses that are oriented on a profit in the next quarter, right? Businesses that have CEOs that make 50 times the amount of salary than the employees in the business. They're out of structure, they're out of context, there's something wrong with them. A cooperative is a business It operates on many of the same principles, but the only difference is a cooperative works for its members.
Right.
And it doesn't work for, and so this is a wonderful thing. That whether it's an agricultural cooperative, a rural cooperative, a city cooperative, I believe in cooperatives. I think they, of course, the legal problems have been generated in the United States, again, during the past 50 years. They've screwed around with the laws with cooperatives, which has, let's say, reduced their viability. But you don't have to, you can have a cooperative and you can have a business that's run cooperatively. It doesn't necessarily have to be registered as a cooperative. And so I'm a big fan of cooperatives, and I think it's the future, personally. If I really believe that in rural areas, there should be cooperatives, not corporates, not these huge corporates. Individual farmers can't make it today. That's almost certain.
Yeah, that's very true. Here's a question about the Paris Agreement. Do you think that these agreements have a possibility of limiting temperature global growth to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius?
The theory is correct. The implementation of that theory by governments around the world is not being done. And so I think that's the main problem. And then we get back to going back to the book by the 3 Baha'is about global governance. In order for this to be done, we have to, if you have a country, it says, I'm going to reduce my CO2 emissions by 2050. Okay, they signed the document, right? That's wonderful. Now, who's going to monitor and enforce that signature? The answer is nobody.
Yeah.
The answer is nobody. And so countries need to be, it needs to be enforceable. You set that target, you now live by that target, but nobody is enforcing the decisions by this climate agreement, and that has to be done. And I think, again, the young people in the world has to get out and say, enough, and it's enough, this has to change. You have to stop this nonsense. And that's the way I look at it. Maybe I'm too much of an activist. But you see, when I live here in heaven out on a farm in Ukraine, well, what other, maybe I'd have too big of a hope for the future.
Well, I think we should probably wrap up now. We've been going 1.5 hours. And I want to thank you very much, Gary, for this fascinating presentation and a very lively question and answer session as well. People are saying God bless. And I should probably mention a little bit more here about this climate change, Global Climate Change Week. Before we close this meeting, I want to invite everyone also to participate in the other activity that the Wilmette Institute has going on for Global Change Climate Week, Global Climate Change Week. I'm having trouble with that one today. I don't know why. There's a discussion forum on the home page of the Wilmette Institute's Moodle system. So if you've taken a course from us, you can easily ask to join. If you haven't taken a course from us, you'd have to email us, and we'd have to add you to the forum. Like I said, the topic that's being discussed for this year is fighting racism and climate change together, 2 interconnected issues of social justice. So particularly interested in people who want to discuss the issue of climate change as it relates to racism. To access this discussion forum, you just have to log into the Wilmette Institute. But again, you have to have taken a course to do that. You have to have your username and password to do that. It's on the Learning Center homepage. One just scrolls down, and you'll find the forum for the Global Climate Change Week right there after links to social media and before the site news. So that's a little bit of an ad for our discussion forum, which has been going on now for several years. It's sort of sometimes it's only about 1 posting a month or so, but that's okay. It has continued to provide a way for people interested in climate change and sustainability to remain in contact with each other, especially after someone has taken our climate change course, our sustainability course, our agriculture course. Those courses particularly have been very useful and interesting for people who want to continue to explore this issue. So, Gary, again, thank you very much. This has been a dynamic, lively, and very, very interesting presentation. We're very grateful for your talk and answering of these questions. We have another I think it's a climate change devotional towards the end of November, and that's the next Wilmette Institute will be offering. I think it's around the 29th of November, something like that. But if you're getting the Wilmette Institute's newsletter, you'll have the exact information there. And then in December, we have 2 webinars on completely other subjects unrelated to climate change and sustainability. Yes, the 29th of November, someone has confirmed. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future in another Wilmette Institute webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob, for all your help. Bye now, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.